Senhor Ministro de Estado e dos Negócios Estrangeiros, Senhor Presidente da Câmara Municipal de Cascais, Senhor Dean da nova School of Business and Economics, Senhor Presidente do Conselho da Diáspora, excelentíssimos senhores e senhoras, caros amigos, senhores convidados. I was invited some time ago by my good friend António Costa de Sá, as chairman of the EuroAmericas Forum, to be the chairman of the EuroAmericas Forum. And the question was, for me, does it make sense to have an EuroAmericas Forum? What is the rationale to have an EuroAmericas Forum? Now that everybody says that the big driver for growth is Asia, now that apparently there are increasing difficulties in the transatlantic alliance, what is the rationale of insisting on that concept of EuroAmericas? Does it make sense still to think about the Atlantic as a zone to unite different continents, not only North Atlantic, between Europe and the United States and Canada? In those matters, we always think about defense beyond economy, trade and investment, but also the south of the Atlantic, the great Brazil and the other countries of South America, but also Africa. And we should not forget Africa as part of this Atlantic equation. So my question is, does it make sense to speak about EuroAmericas and Atlantic space? And I will try to respond with something that I could call, if it was a text, I call Lubito, Montevideo, Paris. 3 trips recently that were important and I would like to highlight. The first was on the 2nd and 3rd of December, President Biden to Angola. President Biden went to Luanda on the 2nd and to Lubito on the 3rd. It was the first visit of an American president to Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, since 2015. It was the first time ever that an American president visited Angola. It was the first time that President Biden visited, of course, sub-Saharan Africa. And why did he go there? Not just because Africa, today with 1.5 billion inhabitants, will have, by 20 years from now, probably 2.5 billion inhabitants, which means that in 2025, in every 4 human beings, 1 will be African, but also because of specific interest in Angola. Biden that said during that conference that the US are all in on Africa was there to support the corridor of Lubito. The corridor of Lubito builds on the old Caminho de Ferro de Benguela from colonial times, Portuguese colonial times in Angola. And what is the goal of the corridor of Lubito is from the city of Kolwezi in DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, to bring critical minerals to Angola and basically to the West. Today, it takes 45 days to bring those materials by van, by truck. After this completion and modernization of the corridor of Lubito, it will take 45 hours. So that's why, besides the president of Angola, João Lourenço, there were in Lubito, together with President Biden, the president of DRC, of Tanzania, and of Zambia. So my point is, the American president found the time, after all these years, to go to Africa, to go to Angola, in giving support to a program that is in fact decided by G7. It's part of the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment. That is, in fact, let's be honest, a response to the Belt and Road Initiative launched by China some years ago. So the best way to somehow be a counterweight to the Belt and Road Initiative by China was considered by the Americans this example of a corridor in Angola, I mean in the Atlantic, I think some of you have already been either in Bengal and Lobito, these beautiful cities over the Atlantic, South Atlantic, but Atlantic. This is important because Africa is part of that response to what's going on in the world. That was the 2nd and 3rd of December. On the 6th of December, there was another interesting visit. The President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, went to Montevideo to witness the conclusion of negotiations of the Mercosur agreement with the European Union. For 25 years, we have been negotiating an agreement, trade agreement, between the European Union and the 4 countries of the Mercosur, Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay. I was part of that. I spent hundreds of hours, trying to put together the European countries and the Latin American countries to achieve it. And there was always a difficulty, sometimes on the Mercosur side. Apparently now the difficulty is more on the European side. But it was the end of the negotiations. If concluded, this is going to be one of the biggest free trade agreements in the world. Europe today has free trade agreements with most Latin American countries, but not yet with 4 countries of the Mercosur, including the biggest, that is Brazil. European Union together is the #1 partner in terms of trade of Mercosur. Individual as a country, it's China becoming every day the most important partner of Mercosur. So those countries want to diversify. Those countries want free trade with Europe. And are we going to accept that free trade with those countries or not? A very interesting issue. That's why the President of the European Commission came to Montevideo, and she signaled that, but already at the same time she was there were at least 3 important countries of the European Union saying that they don't agree with the agreement as it was concluded. So some changes will be necessary, they say, for the agreement to be signed. As you know, the European Commission negotiates on behalf of the 27 member states, but afterwards it is necessary to have the majority in the Council and to have the consent of the European Parliament. So that was my 2nd trip, 6th of December. Then there is 7th of December, the day afterwards. There was a very interesting visit. Mr. Trump, not yet president, but president-elect, came to Notre Dame in Paris. It's quite interesting because, in fact, he's not yet elected, he's not yet invested as president, but he was already re-elected. And he was received with great pomp, and he likes pomp. In fact, in another visit he made to Paris, the 14th of July, the National Day of France, he was very impressed by the military parade, and when he came to Washington, he said to the Americans, we'd like to have something similar in Washington. Until now, it was not yet organized, but if it happens, it will be really amazing. We are used to see that in Moscow, in Beijing. Can you imagine a military parade in Washington? Why not? That would be interesting. Anyhow, President Trump was received with all honors, as if he was already the president, and he found the time not only to engage with President Macron, but also with President Zelensky. It was a relatively short meeting, but afterwards also he went to the British Embassy to meet Prince William. So which means that history still matters of the special relationship. But the point was, he visited Europe for a cultural, a celebration of a great icon of the European history, European culture, European spirituality, Notre Dame de Paris. Now, my point is, what is the link between those 3 trips? The link is, it is in this space, Europe and the United States and Latin America, so Europe and the Americas on one side, but not forgetting Africa, that we are going to see if it is possible or not to keep the world order open. If it is possible that those who are criticizing the Americans, and namely Trump, because they are protectionist, are they going to show or not this kind of protection? Or are we going to be able to conclude trade agreements, namely with Latin America? This is why I believe, more than ever, it makes sense to speak about the EuroAmericas space. It makes sense because if it was not, if it was not the European and American solidarity against the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, I'm sure the Syrian regime of Assad will not have fallen. Because it was because of the concentration of forces of Russia to keep their forces against Ukraine that were making it impossible to intervene supporting their dictator in Syria, Mr. Assad. By the way, it is from bases in Syria, it is from the bases, the EAM in Syria, and from the naval bases of Taurus that the Russians have launched their operations in Africa, namely in support of the Wagner militia in West Africa. So I'm making these points just as an example of everything is connected. And if the Europeans and the Americans want to continue to play some role in the world, I believe it's quite important that they understand that it is not with unilateralism, it is not with nativism, it is not with protectionism, it is not with nationalism. It's promoting trade and understanding between all sides of the Atlantic, and including Africa. And more than ever, this is important, because if we don't have that view, what happens is that the mobilization of resentment of the so-called global South against the global North, and by global North, sometimes people mean what before was called the West, United States, Canada on one side, and the Europeans on the other. That is the target of some of these discourses against the global North. So we need to show that there are really great possibilities of cooperation and collaboration with effective results between North and South, including in the Atlantic area, between Europe and America. I mean North America, but also with South America. And this is critically important at the moment we are living. If you want to keep the world open for business, if you want to keep the world open also for the flow of ideas. Just to conclude, Portugal, in the middle of all this, Portugal is a member of the European Union, full member. Portugal is a founding member of NATO. Portugal is, in fact, together with Spain, the only European country that is member of the Comunidad Iberoamericana, the Ibero-American community. Portugal, I believe, has all the conditions to play a role in this order, if we stick to our values and if we understand that it is by openness and not by narrow nationalism and narrow protection that we can survive in this very complex world. That's why I believe it makes sense to have this EuroAmericas and to have it here in Cascais, in Portugal. Thank you very much for your attention.